Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Oh Really Podcast. Today's episode, to me, is super freaking exciting because I have never disclosed this on the podcast before, but I have been recently diagnosed with ADHD. And obviously, Oh Really Podcast focuses on taboo topics, vulnerable, challenging, and spicy. And I feel like ADHD, it is a mix of all three, and we're going to talk about it in the episode, but it's definitely a really vulnerable and challenging topic, especially as someone who has got it or someone that you live with or a close friend, and just kind of understanding it a little bit more. So I have chosen the best guest today, and I have been hunting her down. She's a hard one to get a hold of because she is so busy, and I'm so grateful that we have found time and she has come on the podcast today. So I have Dr. Hannah Korrel, and if that name rings a bell, it's because she's a bloody legend. Like, she is such a mental health advocate. She wears so many hats. She's not only just a clinical, neuropsychologist, which to me is already badass, but she's also an author of an amazing book called How to Break Up with Friends. She is so good at explaining relationships, and she's actually been on the project so many times as a relationship expert to talk about, getting mistreated and like kind of standing up for yourself. And she's also a massive advocate for being assertive. And she has an app as well. I don't know how this woman fits everything in. Plus, she's come on Oh Really Podcast today. So a huge welcome to Dr. Hannah Korrel.
Oh, yay. Thank you so much. What an intro. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And also I need to say congratulations on your recent diagnosis of ADHD. That is such a milestone. Congratulations. I think we need to hold space for a second for the fact that you got a diagnosis, and I would like to hear a bit about the process of that if we have time in the podcast today, because I'm sure others probably want to hear about that too. But congratulations. It's not easy to get through a diagnosis. So well done.
Thank you so much. And honestly, it has been a journey. So I'll definitely dive into it during the episode for sure. Now, the reason I have chosen you, in particular is you love the brain, Dr. Hannah. You love the brain, and you love explaining the brain. Yummy. You just, the way you explain things as well, I get it. I understand it. You're incredible at what you do, and you're so passionate about what you do, which is why I just gravitate so much towards you. It's why I stalk the hell out of you as well, which is why I know so much about you.
Jess is actually outside my window right now.
Yeah, I am. I'm just looking in. I know what you're wearing. No, I was kidding. It's video. That's why. Hilarious. But yeah, so ADHD, I feel like, is such a hot topic at the moment. So, as I said, my personal journey, I've been diagnosed recently, but I feel like it's been such a hot topic in the last couple of years. So many adults are getting diagnosed now. And I actually put some stories up recently on my personal Instagram and my Oh Really Instagram, and I was flooded with questions. There's so many people are being diagnosed. So my particular story was really interesting. I'll go through it throughout the episode, but I'd love to start off with what actually is ADHD and what is ADD? Because that's the question I even get asked. So what's the difference between ADD and ADHD? And my psychiatrist actually didn't give me very much education. And as I said, I'll go through it during the episode. I've left clueless. I've left I still have no idea. I don't understand my brain. And I want to unpack this during the episode, and people that have this diagnosis or whatever, they can understand it more. What is it, Dr. Han? What is it?
Well, that's a great place to start. Good question. Excellent question, Jess. And you're totally right. There has been a bit of an increase in people getting diagnoses and seeking diagnoses. And I'm sure we'll talk about why. It's more I think initially it's just really briefly, it's after COVID, a lot of people didn't get a diagnosis. So got a huge backlog of about 2 years worth of people who should have been diagnosed, but they couldn't get access to a clinician. And then secondly, all the people who were away during, the lockdown period, taken away from their usual environments, who then realized, oh, wow, I have a lot of trouble concentrating. When I'm not at work, and there's not the pressure of being at work and the demands of work, I really struggle to pay attention. And maybe I less structure showed them how much they were reliant on that structure. And so they then have come forward and have since been seeking a diagnosis. So you're right, there has been a spike in people who the backlog mainly of getting a diagnosis can be really frustrating for people waiting for an assessment because the wait times can be quite long. I'm not sure for you if you had a really long wait time in getting an appointment with your psychiatrist, but it can be very frustrating. Or just say, hang in there, guys, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. In terms of what is ADHD, so ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, okay, ADHD. And that term it's developed over time. It used to be ADD, so Attention Deficit Disorder, but it's evolved over many, many years to include this hyperactive impulsive component to it. And it's they put these two disorders together essentially. So there's this thing called the DSM, which I'm sure, Jess, you'd be aware of. It's a Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, which is in its 5th edition. And then we also have this thing called the ICD, which is the International Classification of Disease, which I think is in its 10th edition. Is that right? 10th edition?
Oh, gosh. I'm clueless.
And you can kind of think of them as like the Bibles of mental health disorders. It's where everyone's heard there's this criteria that you have to meet to get a diagnosis of certain things. That's where the criteria live. It's in these books, these tomes, these huge books that outline, to get this diagnosis, you need to tick all these particular boxes. And they keep updating them every 10 or so years. They update them with more recent information and research. So ADHD over time have basically evolved. It was called hyperkinetic disorder way back in the day, almost 100 years ago. Yeah. And it was this dysfunction of restlessness. I thought it was this, dysfunction where kids couldn't sit still. So initially it was boys picked up who were hyperactive, and then that slowly has evolved over many, many, many years of lots and lots of research into eventually us figuring out, there's also an attention deficit that occurs, so difficulty paying attention, executive function issues, so that can be difficulty with impulse control, that can be difficulty with procrastination and switching tasks and saying dedicated to a particular task, or flicking between this task and this task and this task and this task, or just not being able to do a task at all, or having what we call extreme aversion to doing tasks, especially menial tasks. And by aversion, I mean every cell in your body's no, I cannot do my taxes. I cannot fold my laundry, beyond the normal procrastinating that other neurotypical people experience. And it can also extend into restlessness. So it's extreme restlessness where you just can't sit still. You're always doing projects. You're always working on things. You're the kind of person who, relaxing, Jess has just put her head up. When it comes to relaxing, you sit in front of the telly and you've got your laptop on your lap, and you've got your phone in one hand, you're doing a puzzle, and you've got some TV on in the background, but you're also getting up and down and cooking your dinner at the same time. So this restlessness where you can't stop doing things, or this hyperactive nature where you just an adrenaline junkie. For children, it's swinging off the chandeliers and climbing the furniture typically, but for adults, it's more this addiction to needing to do movement. And often they do a lot of exercise. They often need that outlet to sleep right. If they don't do their rock climbing or their bouldering or their, million other things, then they can't go to sleep at night. And finally, impulsivity, which is this sensation-seeking impulse, or this difficulty with regulating impulses, where they might struggle with, thought pops in the head and the behavior happens automatically without a lot of consideration of, should I actually do that? And that can also lead to behaviors like gambling difficulties, sex difficulties, drug use difficulties, and things that speeding difficulties and driving, things that place you in a little bit of danger. So that's kind of a long answer, but when I was going into the diagnostic criteria, ADHD is split into 3 different parts. So you can either be predominantly inattentive, so mainly you have the inattention issues and the difficulty concentrating. You can be predominantly hyperactive and impulsive, so mainly you have the difficulty with restlessness, not being able to sit still, not being able to control your impulses, or you can have a combination of the two. So that's both inattentive and hyperactive. So in terms of what's the difference between ADHD and ADD, Nothing really. It's just when people say ADD, they're probably referring to the inattentive component of the ADHD profile.
I've already learned so much. Like, I've spent so much money on my psychiatrist, and like, I already just learned so much in that, like, that little spiel just then. I'm like, what? You know, even Google and stuff doesn't explain it. And that's why I really wanted you on this podcast so much, because I was like, even just that is like, just exploded in my head. So I definitely have the restless side of things, because I thought it was the, you know, when people don't have good social skills, or they like cut people off and they're really loud. And I don't know, I don't have, like, I am definitely loud, but like, I do have good social skills and I understand that. So I was like, well, I don't know, I don't fit into that box. I don't fit into that box, but it's the restlessness. It's that box that yeah. And that's what I was trying to explain to my psychiatrist. And he was not very good though.
Okay, right, I see. So this kind of segues nicely into the difference in women and men in presentation between males and females. So a little caveat to that DSM I was telling you about earlier, and ICD I was telling you about earlier, it's all based on boys. It's all based on samples. The research that those criteria are based on is based on young boys and young men. And mostly women were excluded from the studies because they were worried that, you know, things like a woman's period would affect the validity of the study. So 50% of the population was excluded. So when people hear the word hyperactive, they go, oh, I don't identify with being hyperactive. I think I'm just inattentive. But they don't actually understand what restlessness means. Restlessness is like a form of that inability to sit still, and it's that up, down. I sit at my desk, but I'm constantly up filling my water bottle, then I'm going to the toilet, then I'm getting a snack, then I'm going off to get my paperwork, and then I got to go down to my car because I left something in the boot, and then I come back up again, and then I forgot my socks. I have to go in the room and put along the pants on because I'm cold, but I forgot to get my socks. I have to go back and get that as well. And it's just this like up, down, and this inability to sit still. Like, maybe you might identify with going to the cinema and being like, you know, it's time to watch a movie, but I struggle to sit through the whole movie at the cinema. Or when I'm at home, when we have movies, we have to put it on pause and have an intermission and have a break, have a snack break, because it's hard for me to just sit through the whole movie and sit still for 2 hours. That's
you explained my whole life. You've literally explained my entire
I see you.
life.
I see you, babe. Yeah, so women often identify better with restlessness as opposed to hyperactive. So young boys, you know, I see them in the clinic all the time. I assess ADHD all the time, right through the lifespan from children to adults, as young as, you know, 6 and as old as in their 70s. I've seen women in their 70s who were never diagnosed. And I've had young boys who will literally, you know, the curtain that you pull across the bed just when you're seeing the GP and they pull that curtain across. I have had little boys wrap themselves up in that curtain round and round. I've had little boys flicking the light switch on, off. I've had little boys upside down on the chair. I once had a little boy who was so hyperactive. He was tilting back on his chair so much that the whole chair gave way underneath him and he just completely collapsed. And I was like, oh my God, your mom's going to think I was abusing you in here. Like, can you please sit still? And this kid could not sit still. And that was that really, yeah, you can see, when you see a hyperactive child, you can really, really see it. And that is really obvious. It's like the neon flashing lights of hyperactive. So it takes precedence and people notice that. Those children can tend to get detected very quickly. But a restless child who's just kind of multiple projects, lots of different projects occurring at the same time, unable to do one job, those people who tend to think, oh, you know, they critical path analysis, but in a really flawed way. So they go, oh, to do the task, I'll start with this. But to do that task, I have to do this. Oh, but to do that task, I have to do this. But to do that task, I have to do this. And then before they know it, the original task is like 30 tasks away from what they're actually doing. They've got 50 tabs open on their computer. They've got they're in the process of doing 5 different things. And they're just every 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, they're just constantly getting distracted with something new or something different. And that inability to persistently maintain their attention on this one particular thing. And that's that restlessness. So it's more of like a cognitive, hyperactive, restless profile than it is that my body is physically moving all the time. So that restlessness, women, hyperactive, or male.
That makes so much sense as well. Like so much sense, because that's what I thought. I was like, I'm not hyperactive. Like, and when I went to my psychiatrist, it was actually a video call, my psychiatrist. So I'll dive a little bit into my story. I went to my GP and there was just particular behaviors that I've really recognized within myself. And I've always thought deep down, like I've definitely got something, whether it's the typical ADHD. A lot of friends joke to me about, of course you've got that. But I've managed well, like my whole life. But there were certain things when it came to impulse stuff, finances, I'm really bad. I am so impulsive with finances. And I'm in my 30s now and I sit there and I'm like, I earn really good money and I don't understand why I don't have good savings and all this stuff. And I'm trying to figure it out why. And it's because I'm so impulsive with my spending habits. And I'm also very spontaneous with decisions. But then a part of me is like, oh no, but those spontaneous decisions I make, I'm so grateful because like it's led me to some amazing paths and like I like that part of my personality. So I was like, well, maybe that's just me. It's not something else. But then I was noticing behaviors of, you know, I live by myself and I'm only one person, right, in this house. And there's me. I have to cook 2 meals at one time. I can't just cook one meal. I have to cook 2. I have to cook 2 meals and then I'm also watching Netflix on my phone and then I'm also rearranging the pantry at the same time. Like that is just chaos. And I recognize the chaos and I'm overwhelmed because then I've got all this food and I'm like, why did I cook so much food? And then I'm thinking about the show I'm watching and then I've half done the pantry and then I'm just like, I'm bloody exhausted and now it's midnight. Like, and then the other side of it is I have severe insomnia. For years and years, I've had severe insomnia and I've tried everything and everything and everything. And finally, I've been doing THC wafers and cannabis and it was working for me. But then I was a bit like, I don't want to be taking this stuff. I don't want to be reliant on taking this type of medication. So I spoke to my GP, who is beautiful, and I said, I feel like there's certain parts of my life that I just really want to improve on. And I feel like maybe I have ADHD and I should see a psychiatrist. And she literally was like, Jess, I just am so proud of you because, you know, since I've met her, she's like, you've really put your health first. You're always getting the checks you need to do. And the fact that you want to go see a psychiatrist to better yourself is incredible. And she goes, from my point, you definitely have ADHD from what I can see in you. And she goes, but you've used it for so much greatness of your life and it's made you such an incredible person. But there's no harm in seeing a psychiatrist just to help mold it, you know? And I was like, thank you. And then I ended up, I think I got referred to about 4 different places. And as you mentioned with the wait list, 7-month wait, 8-month wait, 4-month wait. And I found one and he had Saturday appointments via video call. And I was like, awesome, that's great. And it was 2 months away. And I was like, that's already such a win. Then I got put forward because he had a cancellation. So I got seen within a month. But I understood why, because he, to me, and I'm a medical professional as well, he was so not great at his job. He was so bad, so unprofessional. He literally had a piece of paper in front of him and he's like, do you have thoughts of harming yourself? Have you ever had thoughts of harming yourself? Do you ever feel more like unusually happy for more than 7 days straight? Do you ever feel like really sad and depressed for more than 7 days straight? Just like reading off a piece of paper and talking to me. And then I explained the kitchen situation and he's like, well, it sounds to me like you have a very busy life. So maybe that's just the only time you can cook. So that's why you're doing it. And I was like, maybe I do have a very busy life, but also I can't sit still. And he was like, maybe that's just you. And I was like, okay, no worries. You're the psychiatrist. But then he was like, oh, no, you do have ADHD. And I was like, okay, so I do. But then he goes, I don't have any reports of my childhood. So I had 13 primary schools. I don't really have a mother in my life. I don't have a father in my life. He kept saying, do you have a partner? I was like, I don't have a partner. He's like, do you have a housemate? I've explained to him a million times I don't have a housemate. So I got 2 friends that have known me for over 10 years who did reports on me. And then he read those reports and then straight away was like, oh, why did your partner not send in a report? And I was like, I've explained to you that I don't have a partner. And he's like, oh, why did your mum not do a report? And I was like, are you not writing notes? Like I was just getting frustrated. But by the end of it, he was like, you do have ADHD. Take these dexamphetamine tablets twice a day. And that was my last appointment. And it's been like 2 months now.
Unique experience. And I'm sorry to hear it wasn't necessarily the best experience. But, I always like the same thing about psychologists, the same thing about GPs. You're allowed to choose who you work with. You're allowed to choose who you engage with. And if they don't resonate for you, sometimes you have to kind of, perhaps you go with the person who's available because it means you don't have to wait 7 months. And it was a means to an end. But you're allowed to be selective later about, maybe I'm going to choose a female who specializes in neurodiverse profiles, and maybe I'm going to, I'll be okay to wait now the 7 months that her wait list is, because I've at least got this interim thing in place. So that's okay. And I'm actually really glad to hear that, your female DP sounds fantastic, and she acknowledged and heard what you had to say, because it is very, very common, especially for young women. For one of the things that I repeatedly see and hear, because I do see a lot of young women and any women of all ages for neurodiverse assessments, so autism and ADHD, and a really common thing that they experience is, and no shade on doctors who are, assessing them, but it's not, I don't believe it's intentional, but a little bit of medical gaslighting in a way, where there's the question of, well, maybe you're just anxious, maybe you're just depressed. That resonated, did it?
Not me personally, but stories that I hear. I've never been told I'm depressed or anxious, but the stories that I hear from other people, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do see the gaslighting.
I think, it makes sense. I often draw a diagram for women who come to see me who, have explained a lifetime of having to do 120, 150% more energy and effort of everyone else just to maintain the status quo in their life. And they're burnt out and they're exhausted. And they get to an age where they go, I just can't do this shit anymore. Why is it this hard? It shouldn't be this hard. And I have to kind of remind them the anxiety or the sadness or the stress is probably stemming from this inattention. Of course, if you had disordered attention, then you would feel stressed and burnt out and anxious, rather than the anxiety being the primary cause that then causes inattention. We have to consider, is it going the other way around? Is that relationship the actual, where's the chicken or the egg there? And it takes a good clinician to be able to identify, this person's often, if you've done therapy, you've done at least 6 months of actual good therapy, you've worked on your core beliefs, you've worked on those negative strategies that you have been using. Maybe you've done medication as well. Perhaps you've done antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, and those issues persist. Those are neurotypical strategies. So perhaps you don't have a neurotypical brain. Maybe you do need to look into, why is this not working? And perhaps it's because I have a neurodiverse brain and I need a neurodiverse strategy. And being validated and hearing, you're not lazy, you're not making this up, you're not stupid, you're not unintelligent, you just had a quirky brain all your life and no one knew. And you had to work around that your entire life. And that would be really exhausting and sometimes depressing and sometimes anxiety provoking. So I'm not surprised if you feel down or anxious sometimes. That can be quite validating to hear. So I'm glad your GP validated you.
I know. Thank goodness I did have that bit of validation, because, I felt really strange after my diagnosis. It's I was like, oh, so I do have an official diagnosis from a psychiatrist. But then I was like, I just feel was he really paying attention to me? Did he just hand me pills? Because I don't know, did he actually care? So he's now done a letter to my GP. So now she can do my medication for the next 6 months, I think it is. So I don't have to go see him again. But I had a discussion with her, and she was like, why are you only on this dose? And I was like, well, that's all he gave me. And she's like, I feel like you need to be on a variable dose, because, you're a shift worker. Does he understand that you're a shift worker and you do, 12 plus hour shifts? So does he understand that every day is different for you. You don't have a routine life. And I was like, well, he didn't ask. He didn't listen really. So she was a bit like, you need to go see another psychiatrist and you need to explain your work. And because I have a very unique life, like I do a podcast, I'm a nurse, I do lots of other, awesome projects on the side as well. But I thrive when I'm busy. I get so happy and I'm so in my element when I've got lots of things going out, but I'm very prone to burnout. And my friends are always, they're so great. My friends are so great. They're always like, remember, Jess, burnout, you're going to burn out. You need to take a step back. You need to start putting boundaries up. I overcommit all the time. So this year's me like learning about boundaries and I've got their support, which is great. But
self-regulation.
Yes, it's so hard. It's so hard. But I'm on the hunt for another one.
You're for another psychiatrist. I see. Got it. Well, there's different ways you can get an assessment. Maybe it's useful to touch on that as well. And I'm thinking I'm going to do some kind of like webinar on how do I get a diagnosis? Should I go for a diagnosis? Because it is really expensive. Like it can be, there's different avenues, right? I'll briefly go through it. And perhaps if guys you want more information, come and I'll do a little webinar. We can talk about it in more detail. But the different avenues you can go down is one, you can go and see a psychiatrist and you can book in and they'll usually book you in for an hour appointment to start. And that appointment can range in costs from anywhere between $600 to $900. So it's not cheap. And usually there will be subsequent appointments that's required. So the first appointment, they'll have a conversation with you about your symptoms. They'll probably send you some kind of questionnaires. Often they're screeners like the Vanderbilt or the DIVA, it's a checklist of ADHD symptoms. And then they will ask probably to do a second session, which is usually about a 30-minute session. They'll often ask for score reports, which, of course, someone with ADHD probably didn't keep, didn't organise themselves to keep, not unusual. And they might ask to speak to your parents. So you may have to, teleconference in your parents, have a chat. And the reason they do that is because they're looking for an early history of ADHD. They're looking for those early signs from when you're a child. And that's because, stimulant medication is a type of drug that's really heavily regulated because it has addictive properties. It can wreak havoc on your cardiovascular system if it's taken, inappropriately. It's not a forever, medication. It's something that we like to use as a strategy initially to help your brain learn the skills of organizing better. And then one day, with the plan of eventually weaning off that once you've built those skills up. So they want to make sure that they're not just giving people this medication unless there's a really, really clear reason to give it to them. So ADHD is not a disorder that spontaneously occurs in adulthood. There should always be a history from when that person was a child, which is why school reports are so sought after, because they'll often say things like, oh, Jess, she was very talkative in class. She distracts other students. She looks out the window. She's a bit daydreamy. Jess would be a lot better if she just stopped talking in class, stuff about unmet potential. Jess would do a lot better if she just organized herself. Is that resonating?
Well, I don't remember my reports because I haven't seen them in such a long time. I'm 33 now, but I had a career counselor meeting and I told her that I wanted to be a nurse. And she was like, oh, hon, you don't have the grades for that. I think beauty therapy is more up your alley. And I literally said, no, I want to be a nurse. Like I want to get into healthcare. And she's like, no, what about hairdressing? And literally and I remember leaving that being so upset because I was just like, I was working like 5 days a week as a waitress until like 11 p.m. at night to support my family. I dropped out of my TER, which is the university, extra things at school. So I just wanted to graduate. That was my goal. And when she said that, I was just like, oh, so I like to prove people wrong. And I am a nurse now. I'm a registered nurse of 11 years and I'm really proud of that. But yeah, so I don't remember what the report said, but I remember that meeting very vividly. And I was just like, so angry. I was just like, what the hell? But even through university, it was awful. But university, like I wasn't very academic. Like, I would get like 55% and I would pass. And I'm like, woo, P for pass. That is all I need right now. Yes, absolutely. So that was me. But then when it came to like actually nursing and stuff, you know, that's where I excelled and, you know, the communication skills and stuff. But I definitely noticed that. But I don't have the reports. I would love to see my report cards, but 13 primary schools, how the hell am I going to get them?
No, and that, you know, what an amazing journey that you clearly had. So often I hear women and men talking about these flashbulb memories in time, or the time that a teacher or someone important to them, you know, made some kind of comment that has just gets you in the core of who you are. You know, not good enough, not smart enough, not clever enough, not pretty enough, not thin enough, whatever the hell it is. And often with, you know, ADHD, I'm often having to tell people, you know, actually your brain is neurodiverse. And when I do testing, which is the second way you can do an assessment, is you can go and see a neuropsych and they can test you for ADHD. So you can get objective psychometric measures. And trust me, baby, boy, will you feel seen, because on average, it's a 4-hour assessment. It's a 1-hour interview, 1-hour feedback. So by the time we're done, we spend about 6 hours together and I know everything about you. And I'll write a 13-page report, you know, that it's everything about you. So you can be pretty sure that it's been very, very thorough. But I often then have to say and explain to people, yeah, you have some deficits in some parts of your attention. But the amazing thing about ADHD is you can also have incredible hyperfocus, and you can have incredible focus when you're interested in the topic. And lots of CEOs, lots of incredible people, incredibly talented people are often neurodiverse. And it's that 1 in 100 brain that allows them to achieve incredible things, be that incredible artist, incredible artistic abilities, to see things outside of the box, to invent something that no one thought of, to have that charismatic, beautiful personality that allows them to host a podcast and be a nurse and do whatever else the heck you're doing. You know, the amazing multitasker that a neurotypical brain just couldn't handle that much stimulus, but it's, you know, you thrive on it. There's pros and cons to having this disorder, and often I'll say, you know, if I give you a magic button to take it away, would you push it? And some people say, no way. You know, I love my neurodiversity, where it allows me to have this incredible energy, this incredible pep, this incredible optimism, this like unbridled optimism that at times is probably totally unrealistic, but you're the happiest person because you just are so spontaneous and so excited to, you know, this zest for life, this childlike zest for life, that just this light that can't be dimmed no matter what's happened in life, which is such a beautiful gift in a way, this incredible gift of having a diverse brain. Anyway, I've rambled, but yeah,
no, you're never rambling. I love hearing you talk. I feel so sane. I was like, oh,
well, hopefully there's a few people who feel sane hearing this.
That's like how my doctor was explaining it when she was like, because I've talked to her about everything that's been going on the last 2 years, and that's when she was explaining it. She was like, you've done incredible things like with your ADHD. She's like, I can tell you now you do have it, but you have achieved such greatness with it. And if there's little things that you want to change, you know, just to, as she said, just to mold it a little bit better, that's great. But she's like, but you know, it's who you are and you're amazing. And she just, I remember leaving that, I actually teared up in that appointment with her, and I was just like, whoa, like that was heavy. Like that was so, you know, heavy for you to say that. But it is nice to be seen. And I've always definitely felt very unique as a person. And it definitely is very challenging with dating, though. I find that, like, I always feel like I'm super intense and, like, I can't find anyone who's as spontaneous as me and wants the amazing life as me. And, you know, I can't just sit still, and I do struggle with that sometimes. So that's like another whole episode, I feel, when it comes to dating.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned social stuff. And again, you know, there's earlier you said, oh, I don't identify necessarily with the social stuff. Like, and again, I think there's a little bit of a misconception about ADHD and the social impact of ADHD. And it's usually sentences like, I'm too much. I get too much. When I'm interested in something I like, I can talk, and I don't realize that I have dominated the conversation and that time has flown and I haven't seen how long I've been talking for or realized how long I was talking for so passionately, or I didn't realize I was starting to raise my voice and the person perceived me as being really intense and almost yelling at them, but I was actually just so super excited to talk to them about this particular topic. Or I get really passionate about things like, injustices. I can get really, really passionate about injustices. Like, but I can't believe the audacity of that person. I can be really, really passionate about it. Or this feeling of like I have to have a filter. If I don't have my filter switched on, then I might dominate the conversation. I might put my foot in it. I might talk too much. I might self-disclose a little bit too much. I'm telling people how much I earn, what happened at work, and I'm, telling people inappropriate things that maybe I wouldn't have said that if I had just taken a pause. And after the conversation, I regret telling them those bits of information. That is the social impact of ADHD, not so much a social inefficiency, like not being able to look people in the eye, wearing a social mask, or having that social confusion, like in, say, maybe a more autism profile. It's more about the filter and feeling too much at times, unless you are constantly monitoring not to get too passionate or too excited. And that filter easily slips away when you are excited, when you're tired, or if you've had a drink or two.
Yeah, the loudness is definitely me. My friends I dated a guy, and after we ended, I never told them this during the time we were together because I knew that they would judge him. But he once said to me, sometimes you're so loud, it causes ringing in my ear. And it honestly cut deep when he said that. And I was like, oh my God. And I look back and it was a very short relationship, but I was a bit like, that is like a horrible thing to say to somebody. But every time I am noticing that I'm too loud, I get a little bit triggered because I'm like, oh, I'm being too loud. Like, and I just have that sentence in my head of being like, you're too loud. Like, you cause ringing in my ear. And I was like, oh. And I do, like, still, that was like 2-3 years ago. And I still just like, oh, Jess, when you get excited about something, you get so loud. But my friends are so beautiful. They'll just be like, Jess, lower voice. Or they'll like do the joke and they're like ringing in my ear. And I'm like, oh. But they're like super supportive.
That's that, again, we see those things, those early core beliefs. Someone said something that I was a little bit sensitive to. I was already sensitive that I felt different. I felt defective. Something feels different about me. And the school counselor says, you're not good enough. Or I already had this suspicion. I feel a little bit too much at times. And the friend's boyfriend makes a shitty comment about you being too loud and you give my ears ringing, like shitty comment. And that's that core belief that starts to follow us around, a sort of whisper in our ear, like, something's wrong with you. Like, see if you're not good enough. And it turns into a core belief that causes sadness, stress, anxiety. And it's probably also linked in again to that neurodiversity. Have you heard the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so another symptom of ADHD, and this overlaps a little bit with the social side as well, is this thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And you can kind of intuitively guess what that means. Do you want to have a guess of what you think that means, Jess?
Is it like a fear of rejection or like... Yeah. By like friends, by family, by everybody.
Mm-hmm. It's this, it's common in ADHD. It's this, this sensitivity to perceived rejection, and that makes us super sensitive to any perceived criticisms. It can often mean that a person, I see it in lots of little children as well. The parents will tell me they just ruminate over the course of the day, and they'll go back through the day and they'll go back through their conversations and where did I put my foot in it? What did I say that was inappropriate? What did I say that was too much? And then fearing that judgment from the friend, the teacher, whoever it was, that they're going to be judged negatively as a consequence. And it's just beyond the normal level of, oh, I'm worried about what that person thinks of me. It's like, 3-4 years later, I'm still thinking about the comment that some ex-dickhead ex-boyfriend made, years ago. It's followed me. It's become part of me to be worried about, just be quiet, just be quiet, just be quiet. And it's that, it's beyond the normal level of I'm worried about the judgment of others. It's like I'm so sensitive to possible rejection. It can be quite crippling for a lot of young children. Adults sometimes learn how to overcome, not having the judgment of others really dictate their life through perhaps therapy and their frontal lobes getting bigger and growing. But it can be a little bit of a weakness that follows us around for the rest of our lives and all of our lives, having this extra sensitivity to perceive rejection and criticism in other people.
Oh, learning so much about myself, I tell you. All right, everybody, I'm interrupting the episode because we're going to play Two Truths and a Lie. This is one of my favorite little segments in the podcast because, we've been focusing so heavily on the ADHD topic, but let's learn about Dr. Hannah a little bit more. So, Dr. Hannah, I want you to give me 2 truths and a lie, and we're going to learn a little bit more about you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I am one of 7 children. I have a massive family, huge family. I've got like 8 nieces and nephews. So huge family. I am a advanced teacher of salsa and bachata.
Okay. Yeah. Number 3.
And growing up, I played the piano, the oboe, the clarinet, dabbled in the violin and the trumpet.
Jesus. Okay. Do you know what? I know for a fact you do bachata because I've seen your stories and I know that you do dancing. So I know that's true. I stalked you, Dr. Hannah. I know.
She's done her research.
One of seven, and then all those instruments. But I've never seen you post anything musical. So I think the lie is all those crazy ass instruments.
Wrong.
You played all those instruments? What the
did, yeah, I did. I'm one of 5 children, not 7.
Oh.
7 would be crazy. It's 5.
One of 5. That's still a lot of children. Oh my God.
It's a lot of kids. And I really do have 8 nieces and nephews. So it's a big family get-together. But yes, I did play the piano, the oboe, the clarinet, and I also started to learn the violin and the trumpet. But my dad was Army, Navy, Air Force. Like we were like a well-oiled machine. There was 5 kids in my family. So dad was like, everyone of who's learning to play the piano, discipline from an early age. So yes, we were a very musical family. Not sporty at all, very musical.
Very musical. Wow. That's a lot of instruments. Was one time at band camp, I was just waiting for a story like that. That is wild. Okay. You got me. You got me on that one.
I'm a big old nerd.
Yeah. Big old nerd. All right, everybody. We're going to get back into the episode now. So before you mentioned, so you can see a psychiatrist, but then you can also see yourself. So a clinical neuropsychologist. Do you need a referral from a GP to see you?
No, it's helpful. It's certainly helpful. So any person can go and get an assessment done by a psychologist or a neuropsychologist. A little bit different. A neuropsychologist specializes in psychometric testing, where we actually test the cognitive domain of your brain and test a bunch of different types of ADHD areas. And I'd recommend seeing a specialist who specializes in ADHD. Anyone can test you, but it's good to see someone who specializes in ADHD because you can miss it if you're not testing the right things. So if you don't have specific tests to check out, is there what's going on with this person's attention in everyday tasks, then it potentially you would perhaps to see like a regular psychologist, or you look at an old psychology report that was done when you were a child, perhaps. It might appear like your attention's okay, but actually that psychologist didn't do a specific assessment of ADHD. So you can seek out a neuropsychologist. You don't have to have a referral to see a psychologist. It's less demanding, I suppose, as seeing a psychiatrist, where you do have to have a referral from your GP. But it depends on the psychologist. So best to check with the neuropsych or the psychologist and see if they require a referral. Some prefer them because then we get a little bit of background information about you, and we get some information about other medical issues, medication that you're on currently, and other factors that are important, like your medical record might be sent across so we can just rule out any other issues that might be going on. But me personally, like I don't require a referral, and a lot of people, probably more than 50% of people I see have come because they themselves have said something doesn't feel right. And they have done the research to go, how do I figure this out in a way that I actually feel I really have been seen and my brain really has been checked and I'm confident with the results and I can trust the results because I really feel like it was thorough. And I think that's probably the part that's difficult for a lot of people when they're going through a diagnosis is, did the clinician get the answer right? Do I feel heard? Do I feel seen? Do I feel like they've done justice for me? So, you can get a second opinion. You always get a second opinion if you feel like perhaps the process wasn't quite right for you. You don't have to take the first opinion.
Yeah, which is definitely what I'm going to be doing. So what's the cost difference between a psychiatrist and a neuropsychologist?
Good questions. So psychiatrists, as I mentioned before, they're usually about like $900 now. You can get some Medicare rebates. That's why it's so important to get a GP referral because you can get a little bit of that money back. But the cost for about an hour session with the psychiatrist is usually about probably ballpark is going about 800-ish, 6 to 900, somewhere in the middle we land on like 800. And they're going to want to see you for 1 hour. Then they're probably going to want to see you for another half an hour session. Then they might also do another follow-up 15-minute session. They might want to do another follow-up 15-minute session. So usually you don't get prescribed medication in the first session. It would be they need to do a second session where they've gotten some questionnaires from an informant. We call them an informant. So that can be like, how your psychiatrist is saying, I need to speak to your mother, I need to speak to your partner, and you kept having to say to them, I don't have a mother or a partner you can talk to. That's because they're looking for collateral information to also indicate it's not just your self-report, it's other people are seeing it as well. And if they're given, these special questionnaires, they're not just questionnaires you can download off the internet, they're special clinical questionnaires that compare you to the normal population. And then we can decide, is Jess clinically elevated or is my informant saying that I'm fine? And, usually we're looking for consistency across those informants. So, yes, the friend and the other friend and me are all saying, well, I can be quite inattentive at times. So that all kind of works out to be, 2 hours worth of seeing a psychiatrist can be, sometimes set you back about $1,000 to $2,000. You do get money back from Medicare, not all of it, but you do get a little bit back from Medicare. So it can cost you, at least $1,000 sometimes to get an assessment from a psychiatrist. In terms of seeing a psychologist or a neuropsychologist, assessments, again, can also range between $1,000 and $2,000. So there's pros and cons to both. You have to see a psychiatrist to get a medication referral for ADHD, to get a prescription. You can't get that prescription from a GP. You cannot get it from a neuropsychologist. You cannot get it from a psychologist. You have to see a psychiatrist. So if you're pretty sure you have, the criteria to meet ADHD, if you have old school reports, if you have, collateral from a mum who, says you were scattered and dreamy and daydreamy and inattentive as a child, then you probably have a good case to go directly to a psychiatrist and skip the psychometric testing. Sometimes the psychiatrist will say, oh, look, I just need some more information because it's not clear to me, and they might refer you for testing, in which case you do need to go and see that psychiatrist to get that psychometric objective data to say there's something different going on in your brain. And some people just prefer to get a more in-depth assessment done. So it's about a 6-hour assessment that costs, about the same as seeing a psychiatrist, but the psychiatrist sees you for fewer hours. They're obviously more expensive. This neuropsychologist sees you for many, many more hours, and then they give you that report that then you can keep for the rest of your life and sort of solve, this is what my report said about my particular brain. And you can keep showing that report to every doctor, every subsequent psychiatrist, every GP that you see for the rest of your life. You have it all documented clearly in a report to indicate these are the symptoms that you were displaying. So it's a little bit of like pros and cons, what's right for me. And part of that might depend on, well, how much of the symptoms do you kind of meet criteria for? So the little bit of self-assessment is going on there to decide what's appropriate, and that can make it a little tricky to decide, but discussing it with your GP is really helpful. Perhaps doing a bit of research online is really helpful. Just kind of doing a little bit of research from reputable sources, not just any old source on the internet, but reputable sources. Do I think this resonates with me? Am I feeling like I'm meeting the criteria? And is it worth me going to see this doctor? Have I also ruled out other things that might be going on? So have I made sure, I've got the alcohol under control, I've got substance use under control, I've got the sleep under control, I've checked the mood stuff out, I've done my due diligence, I've seen the psychologist, I've got all those things under control, but the inattention is still occurring. That was, sorry, in a nutshell. There you go.
No, that's so good. I didn't even know that was an option. Like, I had no idea whatsoever. So that is already so helpful. And I feel like that's definitely something that I would like to do, because I just feel like, my psychiatrist, it was, it was great that he's like, you have this, take this med, see you in 6 months. But it just felt very, very clinical, very just like handed me some pills and then that's it, and thankfully I've got that nice GP that I can chat to and, we get along great. But I would love to know my brain more. And that's why I wanted to do this episode as well. And for so many other people, because I have these discussions and I'm like, what even is the difference between, ADD and ADHD, and what's this? And all the questions I was getting asked, I will try and ask you now. There's a lot of questions about coexisting conditions with ADHD and autism. A lot of people were sending me stuff about that. Is there quite a heavy link with ADHD and autism?
Great question. Excellent questions. Though, yes, there is 100%. So a lot of people with autism have ADHD. Not everybody with ADHD has autism. I'll say that again. A lot of people with autism have co-occurring ADHD. Not everyone with ADHD has autism. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So it's basically a neurodiverse brain. When you have a brain that's wired a little bit differently, that can predispose you to a lot of different neurodiverse conditions. So things like specific learning disorders like dyslexia, the very popular one, autism, ADHD, it can co-occur together because your brain is wired a little differently. Things like sleep disorders are often very common in ADHD as well, and autism. So Jess is put her hand up. And that's because your brain is overstimulated. It's hard to get to sleep. And that's why stimulant medication is really helpful, because for an ADHD brain, what it does is it brings you down to a regular baseline. So for a neurotypical brain, it will bring you up and make you overstimulated. But for an ADHD brain, it would bring you down to a normal regulation. So a lot of people who take the stimulant medication then report having better sleep. Even though it's a stimulant, they actually have better sleep. And one of the best ways of telling if you have ADHD is often, trial by medication. Does the medication work for you? Is it effective? Do you feel like over the long term, and long term does mean 3 to 6 to 12 months, give it a good shot, is life better or is life the same? Are you more organized or are you the same organized? Have you seen a change in the benefit? And the people around you endorse also seeing a change in the benefit? So it'll declare itself reasonably well if the medication is working for you. And I will put a little caveat on there. Sorry, Jess, I know I'm talking a lot, but I'll put a little caveat, guys. Don't take your friend's ADHD medication. Do not take your friend's ADHD medication. Do see a doctor. Do see a neuropsychologist. And the reason I say that is because you may perceive yourself to have better concentration when you take a bit of the desamphetamine or the dexamphetamine or the Ritalin or whatever stimulant medication it is. The literature tells us that people who do not have ADHD who take stimulant medication then become more ADHD. So while they're on that medication, they can't concentrate as well. They end up multitasking ineffectively. So they're doing a bunch of different tasks at the same time. None of it well, but they perceive themselves to have better attention. So it's a bit of a placebo effect where you think you're concentrating better, but actually, practically, you're doing worse with your attention. So it really is important to properly get it assessed by a professional who specializes in ADHD.
God, seriously, I'm learning so much. This is so great. Thank you so much. Honestly, the other questions, and it's so funny because of my sleep problems, because that's what I said to the psychiatrist. And that's the first thing I noticed with taking the medication is that I was sleeping so much better. And then I didn't want to take it every day because I was like, oh, I need to have breaks. And then the days I wasn't taking my medication, I would get massive insomnia again. And I'm very used to having very minimal sleep and just surviving. Like, that's just mine, very normal. That's just how I roll. And I do have better sleep. And it is so puzzling to me because I was like, but I'm taking a stimulant. But just the way you explained it, it shuts my brain.
Yes. It quietens the brain.
It does.
Yes. So when you're lying in bed, those voices of the million things you need to do and the million priorities you need to do, and rehashing that, remember that rejection sensitivity I talked about, where you rehash the conversations and your brain will not let you stop replaying the mistake that you made. Or you just can't go to sleep because your brain's so wired and you can't stop getting the dopamine hit on your phone, and then you need to get up out of bed and you're just doing stuff in the spare room and trying not to wake other people in the house up, even though, you don't need to sleep, but you just can't, just not sleepy. Because your body's so awake. But it'll be tired at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning. That's when you get tired. But 3 in the morning, wide awake, ready to make some furniture. Let's put some IKEA furniture together.
I'm so productive at nighttime. The things I get done at 2 in the morning, seriously.
Yeah.
Like, I love those things I do, but I'm like, why can't I do them at 8, like in the morning, or like 8 at night? Why do I do them now?
The amount of people who tell me that, a common thing, putting together furniture or starting a massive project at 11 o'clock at night, and at the same time not following any of the instructions.
I wing it.
Very common. Restlessness.
Yeah, this is me. This is 100% me. See, I know I've got it, but I would love to have a proper 6-hour assessment. That is what I'm going to do. The only other thing that we haven't spoken about is what are the factors of someone that predispose them to ADHD. So I know that there's a genetic factor and being premature as well, like having a premature birth. Like, run through those types of things that predispose someone.
Okay, great. It's such a good question. So good. Maybe we have to have an episode 2 on this, because I feel like we're barely scratching this. I could talk about this forever. Can you tell I love it so much?
I will do episode 2 with you if you have time.
Oh, babe, I'm all for it. My PhD was ADHD. That's what I focused on in my PhD. And I'm one of the new authors cited in the new DSM, which is the text revised version. So Korrel et al., my study is in there. So shout out to the ladies representing us.
I love this.
So we're slowly getting more people. So in the DSM, more women in the DSM. Oh gosh, what was I just about to
predisposed?
The predisposing factor. Let's talk about ADHD. Okay, predisposing factors. So yes, the thoughts about ADHD is it's thought to relate to the frontal lobes of your brain. So if you put your fingers on your head and your forehead, can you feel there's like just a wee little divot? Can you feel how there's like kind of 2 lumps on the left and the right? And there's just the slightest little divot in the center. Can you feel that?
I actually can, yeah.
You might be able to feel it. Yeah. So that's like when you have when you're a baby and you've got the 3 parts of your skull that are not yet fused together, because that's how your mum can birth you out of.
Is it your fontanelle or something?
You're very good. So those 3 parts of your brain or your skull will fuse together over time. So we have to be so careful of babies' heads. And they will mold to the lobes of the brain underneath the skull. And that's why we get this little lump in the top of our head, because it's molded to your frontal lobes. Okay. And those are the 2 big lobes on the left to the right underneath. You put your hand on your forehead as if you're taking the temperature. That's what you're feeling underneath your forehead is your frontal lobes. Now, development of your brain goes from the base of your neck, which is like, you feel the back of your neck. You can probably feel like that little U shape of the base of your skull, and then the back of your head. That's where your brain starts from developing, that base of your skull. And then it goes all the way forward. And the last part to develop is your frontal lobes. Your frontal lobes are your more adult brain. They take a while to develop. And that's the part of your brain that's responsible for impulse control, goal-directed behavior, decision-making that's based on rational, reasonable rational judgment, not reacting in the heat of the moment, not reacting emotionally. So we don't expect toddlers, we don't expect young children to have very good executive function, frontal lobe function, because their frontal lobes haven't fully developed. So, you often see kids in the shopping centre having an absolute tantrum on the ground because their mum wouldn't buy them the lollipop and they have no sense of delayed gratification. You can't sit down and go, little Jimmy, or give it to you when we get home, just calm down. We can't expect that in children. We have to wait until we're a bit older for their frontal lobes to develop. And it takes up to your 30s for your frontal lobes to fully develop. So the reason I told you that long backstory is because neurodiverse conditions often heavily affect the frontal lobes of our brain. And ADHD in particular affects the frontal lobes of our brain and that executive function, which is my ability to regulate myself, regulate my emotions, and act not impulsively. Okay. So the factors that affect your frontal lobes can be, one, genetics. In my genetic wiring, just like the color of my eyes, the size of my nose, the length of my fingers, those are all hardwired in my DNA. That's my genetics. So if I have a family history of having blue eyes or green eyes or whatever, I'm probably going to get that as well. But if my frontal lobes are a little bit quirky, then I might get that too. Okay, so genetically, yes, you can be predisposed, but don't be surprised if your parents and your parents' parents are not diagnosed, because we weren't very good at diagnosing them back in the day. The second thing that can affect your frontal lobes are things like environmental factors. Okay, so if you were to have exposure to toxins in the womb, so things like alcohol consumption in the womb, things like trauma and stress in mothers during pregnancy, things like smoking during pregnancy, they can all affect the structural development of your brain. Okay. After you're born, things that physically affect your brain can also have an impact. So if you got dropped, if you experienced, a head injury of some kind, a required brain injury, things that could literally physically change the development of those frontal lobes. So think of like physical stuff in the environment. Okay. The third thing is psychological things. So this is more to do with young child development. So not only in the womb, but also as an infant and then as a young child, exposure to things like trauma. So often people think trauma is a precluding factor and they go, oh, that person had trauma, they can't possibly have ADHD or they can't possibly have autism. But actually, trauma affects the frontal lobes. ADHD affects the frontal lobes. Autism affects the frontal lobes. So they actually are more likely to coexist than to not coexist. So it's not unusual for a person to have, you might have a genetic predisposition for inattentiveness, but if the environment doesn't bring that out in your genetic profile, your phenotype, the expression with genes on your personality, then you might never display those symptoms. However, if your environment is so stressful that it elicits then this activation of certain genes, then you might display very inattentive or very hyperactive traits. So that can be linked back to sort of early childhood developmental stress. And that's not just physical trauma, which people often think, I haven't had physical trauma. I didn't grow up in a war-torn country. But we're also talking about things like emotional stress as well. So attachment issues early on, postnatal depression in mums who weren't able to connect with their babies, and then ongoing traumas where there might have been neglect or emotional abuse when the child was very young. And usually the younger those traumas occur, then it tends to be associated with longer effects. A person can kind of work towards growing out of that and dealing with some of those traumas and working on those traumas. But the amount as to whether it's actually changed the structure of your brain and the way that the neurons fire in your frontal lobes depends on the amount of trauma, severity of the trauma, and the timing of the trauma. When did it occur, how early, and for how long? So those are just in a nutshell, you've got genetic environment and you also have social. Those are some of the things that can cause presentation like an ADHD.
Yeah, it's honestly so fascinating. When I was deep diving into it earlier, I got sent a question about PTSD can be mistaken for ADHD, and she sent me some really incredible articles, and I was a bit like, oh wow, like, and then I started looking at the predisposition and all this stuff, and I was like, I tick a lot of those things as well. I was like, I just want to learn my brain. Like, I really want to learn my brain, and I really want to know why I'm like this. So honestly, maybe there needs to be a part 2. And guys, you can literally write to me.
So let's do it
to do a part 2, because I just wanted to scratch the surface of like what ADHD is, and I think we covered so much. Like, even for me, I feel like this was like my own personal therapy session with you, and I got to learn so much about myself. Yeah, you read me. You read me well. But like, honestly, I just so appreciate your time. Like, you are such a busy woman. You wear so many hats, and you love this.
I love it. I love it. I freaking, sorry, pardon me. I love this stuff. You can tell I'm tired, guys. I've lost my filter a little bit myself. But I just find it the most fascinating, incredible. And, one thing, Jess, I will say, like, I'm conscious of time because I know we've talked tonight. But I will say, that when they've done research that's kind of added up all the different neurodiversities there are in this world, and, there are specific learning disorders, there's dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, there's autism, there's 3 different levels of autism, there's nonverbal autism, 1, 2, 3 different types of autism, there's ADHD inattentive, ADHD hyperactive, ADHD combined. There's so many different neurodiversities. When they added up all the people who are thought to, or the base rates, the percentages of the population who have neurodiversity, it's something like 42% of the population is thought to have a neurodiversity, which I don't know about you, but to me, I'm like 42% is not, it sounds more like, the mainstream than it does the diverse. It's almost as normal as being neurotypical these days.
100%. Wow, 42%. That is actually a wild statistic. Fascinating. So fascinating. We're going to have to do a part 2 because I could talk about this shit for at least another hour.
Me too. Definitely. And, there's so much about women and the difference between women and men in detection, the different ways that women can present, the different ways that stuff can kind of display. And maybe we need to have like a more of a spicy session on some of the spicier symptoms of ADHD related to, potential addictions and sex and gambling and all those areas as well. So
I'm definitely a sexaholic. I was going to talk about that, but that's another episode.
Yeah, let's do a spicy episode on some of the things people can feel. Sometimes there's a lot of shame in some of the symptoms, and people perhaps either don't want to acknowledge them, or maybe they didn't realize that those symptoms were actually that wasn't the usual way people live. Often that's what I see, people not realizing that I didn't realize the way I was doing it wasn't normal. And it was only when somebody showed me or flagged it to me that I realized the way that I was living wasn't actually the usual way, or was way more energy demanding than what other people have to do. So that's really not uncommon either. But I could talk to the cows come home about this. You'll have to shut me up because I'm never going to shut up.
No, I never will shut you up. I was like, keep going, keep going, keep going. No, this is honestly epic. And yeah, like, this is the whole purpose of Overly Podcast as well. Like, right now we're just scratching the surface with ADHD just to kind of get people to understand it a little bit more. But like, I really do want to dive, and really heavily focus on the more shameful things, the more, that has that stigma about it, because my goal is to smash stigmas. That's kind of like how our Really Podcast has begun. And it's like my uniqueness, my quirkiness. I'm trying to like let other people know, like, we are normal and we are okay. And just because we're quirky, it's okay. I like the quirky word that you use too. I'm going to start using that more.
Yeah, you're not bad, you're not wrong. You're just different and beautiful and quirky. And that's what makes you so amazing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Han. You've been so busy and we're smashing this in the middle of the night, but we need to eat some dinner and we're going to organize round 2.
Yes, can't wait. And send in more questions, because let's just have a question round, because I feel like that's the best way to get through everything. Just send me all your deep and your dark and dirty questions, because anything that you want to unpack, guys, send it through.
Excellent. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Han. Keep tuned for part 2. And remember to click on the little notification symbol on Overly Podcast so you get an alert every single week. Give us a review and send in your messages and share the love, everybody. And make sure to go to Dr. Han's Instagram as well. It's called No Bull Psych. She posts some epic content. Stalk her like crazy like I do. And just, share the love, everyone. All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye.